Hello, Dr. Francisca Anene here, and this is PPL421, Land Law 1. I trust that you'll be making progress, enjoying our lessons. So today we are going to be learning another topic on land law. Of course, you remember that land law 1 majors on customary rules of land law, customary land tenure. So let's see what we have today. So, as usual, take notes, take part in the activity, and I promise you, you will get better at it. So this is our 6th lesson, and in this lesson, we'll be looking at determination of customary tenancy. At the end of the lesson, some of the things you should be able to know will be how to explain the ways in which customary tenancy may be determined, a discussion of the concept of relief against forfeiture and the role of courts in granting relief against forfeiture. So first things first, what do we mean, by determination of customary tenancy? Determination in land law, as you know, means to bring a relationship to an end. So determination of customary tenancy, we'll be talking about the ways in which a customary tenancy can come to an end. There are 3 major ways. The first is accomplishment of the purpose of the tenancy. This applies to tenancies that were granted for a particular purpose. So if, for instance, tenancy was granted for the purpose of farming over, the period of the farming season, it means that when the crops, that the tenant was allowed to plant are ready for harvesting and the tenant harvests the crops, then the tenancy will come to an end. Close to or closely related to accomplishment of purpose would be, of course, completion of time. So where the tenancy is for a fixed term, then the tenancy will come to an end upon the completion of the term of the tenancy. Another way is by abandonment. Now, it's important to note that abandonment is a question of fact, right? Abandonment was defined in the case of Annan and Bain as where a tenant goes away and the house built by him on the land subject of the customary tenancy falls into ruins. However, there may be reasons for the tenant's absence which may not be purely abandonment. So the intention of the tenant is important. So you see, for instance, in the case of Bailey and Offiong, the tenant could not continue, and even though the land looked like it had been abandoned, the tenant fell ill and so could not continue with his farming. So he was not intending to abandon, but he was precluded from continuing with his acts of tenancy because of ill health. In such a case, the tenancy cannot be said to have been determined. And the third way in which a tenancy will be determined will be forfeiture. So where the tenancy comes to an end because it has been forfeited, it means that the perpetuity of interest that is supposed to be enjoyed by the customary tenant has also come to an end. And usually, forfeiture comes up as a result of the tenant's misconduct or misbehavior. However, it is important to note that it is not automatic, and the degree of misbehavior will impact on whether there's forfeiture or not. So if there's minimal misbehavior, it cannot be said to result in forfeiture. So examples of significant misconduct. These are questions, again, a question of fact, and some of the acts that will be deemed to be significant are alienation without an overlord's consent. So you remember what we said about the nature of customary tenancy. Consent must be sought. So where a tenant goes and alienates without seeking consent, then he can forfeit the tenancy. However, this will not apply, of course, to cola tenancy. Another example is use of land for a different purpose. So where tenancy was granted for a particular purpose, the tenant must stick to that purpose. If he uses the land for a different purpose without the consent of the overlord, he can forfeit the tenancy. And then failure to pay tribute or rent. Of course, this is usually a question of degrees. Failure to pay tribute may be misconduct, yes, but it only becomes significant where the tenant was asked to pay. A demand was made for tribute or rent and the tenant refused to do so. Remember what we said about tributes, that it may not be paid all the time. And then where a tenant denies or challenges the overlord's title, obviously that is a major ground for forfeiture, because his title flows from the overlord's title. So if he denies the overlord's title, he has by implication denied his own title. So I'd like you to discuss the ways in which a customary tenancy may be determined. So moving on, we are going to talk more about forfeiture as a ground for customary tenancy. Now, where a tenant has engaged in, an act of significant misconduct or misbehavior, well, the tenancy will be maybe assumed to have been forfeited. However, there must be steps to take. The first thing you must remember is that the overlord has a right to overlook or forgive acts of misbehavior. So where the overlord does that, then he has waived forfeiture and there will be no forfeiture. But where the overlord chooses not to overlook or forgive, an act of forfeiture, then he has to take definite steps to take possession. He has to go to court and recover possession in line with the prescriptions of the law. In the past, the overlord could simply re-enter and drive out, the tenant under customary law and all of that, but that is no longer possible. That will amount to self-help, and self-help is no longer allowed in law. So that's why we say that it is not automatic. The overlord must take definite steps. Now, relief against forfeiture. So this presupposes that the overlord has taken steps. He has applied to court to recover possession of the land. At this point, the courts may now exercise their equitable powers and decide whether or not to make an order of forfeiture or to refuse to make such an order and instead make another order that will, still bring about justice, but will not result in the customary tenant forfeiting, the tenancy completely. Again, it is not automatic. The fact that a case has come before a court does not mean that the court must make such an order. It is actually, as we said, equitable. So the court will be trying to do justice to all the parties, right? And so we'll need to consider on a case-by-case basis whether a tenant deserves to be granted this relief. And usually also the tenant would apply to be granted this relief. So some of the points that the court may consider in deciding whether or not to grant relief against forfeiture will be the attitude of the tenant, the gravity of the misconduct complained about, the possibility of an alternative remedy. So is it possible for maybe damages to be paid or for the tenant to be asked to pay, his tribute or rent and all of that? And then the nature or degree of denial of title. So for instance, remember what we said about failure to pay tribute. If the tenant, if it's tribute and the tenant just didn't pay, that may not be, significant. However, if a formal demand has been made, the demand has been made by the overlord that the tenant should pay, and the tenant still insists on not paying, then that is a higher degree of denial. Okay, again, failure to pay rent can be viewed as denial of title depending on the facts surrounding that failure to pay rent. So you can look at the case of Abioye and Yakubu to see where a tenant actually denied the landlord's title and then refused to pay rent and tributes as well. So to your second activity, advice on what a court may consider in granting relief against forfeiture. Think about it. So, some of the things that we have learned in this lesson are the ways in which a customary tenancy may be determined. You remember we said accomplishment of purpose or completion of term, abandonment, and forfeiture. And then we looked at the grounds for forfeiture under a customary tenancy, the concept of relief against forfeiture, and some of the factors a court may consider where relief against forfeiture is sought. You of course can download the video and watch it again and again, and if you have questions you can post it on the discussion forum so that we can treat it during our lessons. So thank you for watching this video, and until our next lesson, take care.